Benjamin Hayes stood in his garage at 6:15 a.m., oil-stained hands gripping a wrench, as he stared at three women positioned outside his front yard, like they'd been rehearsing this moment. Margaret, the silver-haired one in an expensive cashmere coat that didn't belong in this blue-collar neighborhood, stepped forward with unsettling confidence. Vivian, tall and elegant behind designer sunglasses despite the early morning darkness, pointed directly at his broken 1969 Chevelle gathering dust like a monument to dead dreams. Camila, the youngest, with eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of his life, smiled with the kind of certainty that made his stomach drop. "Mr. Hayes." Margaret's voice cut through the morning silence. "We need your help, all three of us, together." Ben's throat tightened as he looked between their expectant faces, their coordinated presence feeling like a carefully orchestrated trap. His voice cracked as the words escaped him. "All three at once? I can't do that." But something in their knowing smiles suggested they'd already anticipated his resistance, and that his refusal was exactly what they'd been counting on. "Daddy, who are those ladies?" Oliver's voice broke through the tension as Ben's 8-year-old son appeared in the garage doorway, still wearing his Batman pajamas. Ben stepped protectively in front of Oliver, creating a barrier between his child and these strangers who seemed to know more about them than they should. The three women's expressions softened when they saw Oliver, but there was something calculated about their reactions. Margaret knelt down to Oliver's eye level, her designer coat pooling on the concrete floor. "We're new neighbors, sweetie. We've been hoping to meet you and your daddy." The past 3 years had taught Ben to recognize danger in all its forms, and these women radiated a different kind of threat than the obvious ones he'd learned to navigate as a single father. Since Rachel's death from cancer, his world had shrunk to a manageable routine. Wake at 5:30, make breakfast for Oliver, drive him to school, work 10-hour shifts at Carson's auto shop, pick up Oliver, help with homework, dinner, bedtime stories, collapse into exhausted sleep. It was survival, not living, but it was safe and predictable in a way that nothing had been during Rachel's final months of treatments and false hopes. Rachel's last words about the Chevelle still echoed in quiet moments when he stood in the garage late at night. "That car represents everything we dreamed of, Ben. Don't let it rust away like I am." But dreams required hope, and hope required energy he simply didn't have anymore. Now these three women stood before him, claiming they could help, and something about their offer felt both too good to be true and too dangerous to ignore. Margaret straightened from her crouch beside Oliver, brushing invisible dust from her coat. "We understand you're protective of your family, Mr. Hayes. We appreciate that." Vivian stepped forward, removing her sunglasses to reveal piercing blue eyes. "We've been living in the area for a few months now, getting settled. We've noticed you and Oliver, seen the care you take with each other." The admission should have been comforting, but instead it raised alarm bells in Ben's mind. "You've been watching us." The question came out sharper than he intended, and he felt Oliver's small hand slip into his. Camila held up her hands in a peaceful gesture, but her smile never wavered. In a small town like Millbrook, people notice things. The man who walks his son to school every morning, who works late but never misses a pickup. The father who teaches his boy to throw a baseball in the backyard every evening. Her words painted a picture of their life that was both accurate and unsettling. "We're not stalkers, Mr. Hayes. We're just three women who've been hoping to find good people in a new place." Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, extending it toward Ben. "We each have vehicles that need attention. Classic cars, actually. We heard you have a reputation for quality work, and we're willing to pay well for expertise." The card was heavy stock paper with simple text that read, "Margaret Romano, Art Consultant. $500 each just for diagnostic work. That's $1,500 for a few hours of your time." The amount hit Ben like a physical blow. $1,500 was nearly a month's rent, or 3 months of groceries. But something felt wrong about the offer, something that went beyond the generous payment and convenient timing. I appreciate the offer, ladies, but I work alone. Always have. His refusal felt necessary, a way to maintain control over a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond his understanding. Oliver tugged on his hand, looking up with wide eyes. But Daddy, they seem nice. And you always say we should help people when we can. The simple logic of childhood cut through Ben's suspicions. Margaret, Vivian, and Camila exchanged glances that lasted just a moment too long. Tell you what, Mr. Hayes, Camila said, her voice taking on a warmer quality. What if we started with just one car? Mine. It's been making strange noises. She gestured toward a modest Honda Civic parked at the curb. The request seemed reasonable, and Ben found himself nodding before he'd fully considered the implications. I could take a look at it, I suppose. Relief flickered across all 3 women's faces, as if his agreement had been crucial to some larger plan. That's all we're asking for now, Margaret said, her smile genuine for the first time. Just a chance to prove we're exactly who we say we are. But as Oliver bounced excitedly beside him, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that these women were anything but what they appeared to be. The first sign that something unusual was happening came on a Monday morning when Margaret knocked on his door at 7 a.m., genuine panic etched across her features. Ben, I'm so sorry to bother you, but my car won't start and I have an important meeting. She wrung her hands in a way that seemed both authentic and performative. Ben followed her outside to where a beat-up Honda Civic sat in his driveway. This is your car. The surprise in his voice was impossible to hide. I believe in being practical, Margaret said defensively. Ben popped the hood and immediately saw the problem. Corroded battery terminals, a simple 10-minute fix. But as he worked, he noticed Margaret's hands. They weren't the soft hands of someone who spent their days in offices. Her fingers bore calluses in strange places, with faint stains under her nails that looked like paint or clay. What kind of consulting do you do? He asked. Oh, various projects, strategy, planning, that sort of thing. Her answer was vague enough to mean nothing. When the engine turned over, her relief seemed disproportionate. She pressed $50 into his hand despite his protests. You're very skilled, Ben. Rachel was lucky to have you. The mention of his wife's name made him freeze. How did you know about Rachel? Oliver mentioned her when we met. Children talk about the people they love. The explanation sounded reasonable, but Ben couldn't remember Oliver mentioning his mother to these women. As Margaret drove away, Ben stood in his driveway, feeling like he'd just participated in some kind of performance without knowing his role. When Oliver bounced down to catch the school bus, Ben asked casually if he'd told Margaret about Mommy, but his son just shrugged and said he didn't remember. 3 days later, Oliver came running into the house after school with excitement radiating from every inch of his frame. Daddy, you'll never guess what happened. Miss Vivian helped me with my art project, and she knew exactly how to draw engines. He thrust a piece of construction paper toward Ben, and what he saw made his breath catch. The drawing was far beyond Oliver's usual abilities, showing a detailed cutaway view of a car engine with labels and arrows that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of automotive mechanics. She was at school for career day, and when she saw me struggling with my How Things Work project, she just started showing me techniques. Career day? Ben examined the drawing more closely, noting the precision of the lines and accuracy of the mechanical details. What does Miss Vivian do for work? Oliver scrunched up his face in concentration. She said something about marketing, but she knew way more about engines than any marketing person should. She even knew the names of all the parts in your Chevelle when I described it. A cold feeling settled in Ben's stomach, as he realized that Oliver had been discussing their personal business with virtual strangers, sharing details that should have remained private. That evening, as Ben was grilling hamburgers on their small patio while Oliver played in the backyard, Camila appeared at the fence with a container of what smelled like homemade cookies. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I made too many snickerdoodles and thought Oliver might enjoy them." She was dressed casually in jeans and a simple blouse, looking more like a typical suburban mom than the mysterious figure who'd appeared in his driveway. Oliver immediately abandoned his toys and rushed to the fence, chattering excitedly about his day at school and his new engine drawing. "You helped him with that?" Ben asked, studying Camilla's face for any tells or signs of deception. She leaned against the fence post with an ease that suggested genuine comfort around children. "He was frustrated and about to give up, so I just showed him a few techniques for seeing complex shapes as simpler components. It's not that different from how I approach my own work." When Ben pressed her about what kind of work that might be, she deflected with questions about Oliver's interests, somehow turning the conversation away from herself without seeming evasive. As they talked, Ben found himself relaxing despite his better judgment. Camila had an easy way of listening that made him want to share more than he should, and when Oliver inevitably skinned his knee while climbing the oak tree, she handled the minor crisis with calm competence. "You're good with kids," Ben observed as she cleaned the scrape with supplies from her purse. "Do you have children of your own?" Something flickered across her face before she shook her head and said simply, "I work with children sometimes." The vague answer added to the growing list of non-answers he'd collected from all three women. Over the following weeks, the three women became a regular presence in their lives through seemingly coincidental encounters and small favors that gradually wore down Ben's resistance. Margaret appeared whenever he was working in the garage, always with some excuse about needing advice, and inevitably ended up helping him organize tools or discussing classic car restoration with knowledge that exceeded her claimed expertise. Vivian started giving Oliver informal music lessons after school, teaching him to recognize different engine types by their sound patterns. Camilla's visits became the most frequent and unsettling, partly because Oliver had developed an obvious attachment to her, and partly because she seemed to understand their family dynamic in ways that went beyond casual observation. "It's like she's studying us," Ben confided to his reflection in the bathroom mirror one night. But even as he said the words, he couldn't deny that their lives had become easier and more pleasant since the three women had arrived. Oliver was happier, more confident, excited about learning new things. Ben himself was sleeping better, laughing more, feeling less like he was drowning in endless responsibilities. If this was manipulation, it was the most benevolent kind he'd ever experienced, which somehow made it more frightening. The turning point came on a Saturday afternoon when Ben was teaching Oliver how to change oil in their car, a practical skill he believed every person should master. They were both covered in grease and laughing at Oliver's creative attempts to describe the viscosity of used motor oil when they noticed the three women standing together at the end of their driveway, each holding car keys and wearing expressions of determined hope. "We've been thinking about your offer," Margaret called out, though Ben was pretty sure he'd never made any offer. "What offer would that be?" He straightened up from under the hood, wiping his hands on a rag. The three women exchanged glances again, that same silent communication that had bothered him from their first meeting. "To help us with our cars," Vivian said, as if this was something they'd discussed and agreed upon. "All three of them. We know you said you prefer to work alone, but we thought maybe you'd reconsider if we made it worth your while." Camila stepped forward with an envelope in her hand, thick enough to contain a significant amount of cash. $1,500, she said simply. $500 for each car, just for diagnostic work. She gestured toward three vehicles parked along the street that Ben was seeing for the first time. Margaret's beat-up Ford pickup truck, Vivian's pristine 1980s BMW, and Camila's converted Volkswagen van. These are our work vehicles, and they all need attention before we can continue with our projects. The way she hesitated before mentioning their projects set off alarm bells in Ben's mind, but the amount of money represented more financial security than he'd had since Rachel's medical bills had drained their savings. Oliver looked up from his bolt sorting with eyes bright with curiosity. "Daddy, those are really cool cars. Can we help them?" The innocent enthusiasm in his son's voice reminded Ben that 8-year-olds saw adventures where adults saw complications. The women waited patiently while Ben studied their faces, looking for signs of deception or hidden agendas. What he saw instead was something that looked like genuine nervousness, as if his answer mattered more than it should for a simple automotive repair transaction. "All 3 at once?" The question came out exactly the way it had during their first meeting, carrying the same sense of impossibility. "That's right," Margaret confirmed. "We know it's unusual, but we're hoping you'll make an exception." There was something almost desperate in her tone. Ben looked at Oliver, who was practically vibrating with excitement, then back at the 3 women who had somehow become part of their daily lives. The money was too good to refuse, and truthfully, he was curious about what kind of problems their vehicles might have. "All right," he heard himself saying, "but we do this on my terms, in my garage, and if I find anything I don't like about this arrangement, it stops immediately." What Ben discovered over the next few hours as he examined their vehicles only deepened the mystery surrounding his new neighbors. Margaret's pickup truck had transmission problems that would require days of work to fix properly, but she seemed more interested in watching Ben's diagnostic process than discussing repair options. Vivian's BMW had electrical issues that suggested someone with advanced technical knowledge had been tinkering with the wiring. Yet she claimed to know nothing about automotive systems. Most puzzling was Camila's van, which had been converted into some kind of mobile workspace with expensive, specialized equipment, though she deflected all questions about what kind of work required such an elaborate setup. "You're not typical car owners," Ben observed as he finished his inspection of the van's custom interior. Camila laughed, but there was something forced about the sound. "We're not typical anything, I suppose. We tend to approach problems from unconventional angles." She ran her hand along the van's modified workbench with obvious affection. "This van has taken me to some amazing places and helped me create some of my best work." When Ben asked what kind of work that might be, she gave him another non-answer. "Problem-solving mostly, helping people figure out how to fix things that seem irreparable." The revelation came not through careful investigation or suspicious behavior, but through Oliver's innocent observation while Ben was reviewing the detailed documentation the women had provided about their vehicles. "Daddy, why do they have pictures of our garage in their car papers?" The innocent question hit Ben like a physical blow, and he flipped rapidly through the pages until he found what Oliver had spotted. Several photographs of his garage taken from different angles, showing his tools, his workbench, and most disturbing of all, the covered Chevelle from perspectives that could only have been captured by someone standing inside his private workspace. The silence that followed Oliver's observation stretched for what felt like minutes, filled with the weight of revelations that Ben wasn't prepared to process. He looked up from the photographs to find 3 pairs of eyes watching him with expressions that ranged from apologetic to defiant, to something that might have been relief that their secret was finally exposed. "I think," Ben said slowly, his voice carefully controlled despite the anger building in his chest, "we need to have a different kind of conversation." He closed the folder with deliberate precision and placed a protective hand on Oliver's shoulder. "Oliver, go inside and start your homework. I need to talk to these ladies alone." Once Oliver was safely inside, Ben turned to face the 3 women who had somehow infiltrated his life through careful planning and his own willingness to believe that good things could happen without hidden costs. "Start talking," he said simply. "All of it. The truth this time." Margaret took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders, as if preparing for a confession she'd been dreading. "My name is Margaret Romano, and I'm a sculptor, not an art consultant, a working artist with pieces in major galleries around the world." Ben pulled out his phone and did a quick search, finding images of elegant gallery openings and articles about million-dollar sales. "Vivian Chen," the tall woman said, removing her sunglasses completely. "First violin, New York Philharmonic. Or I was, until recently." Another search confirmed her identity, revealing performance videos and concert reviews that praised her technical mastery and emotional depth. Camila stepped forward last, her hands clasped like a child preparing to confess. "Dr. Camila Santos. I was a pediatric surgeon at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia for 10 years before I transitioned to art full-time. I'm also a painter." Ben's search revealed medical journals and news articles about innovative surgical techniques, followed by pieces about a surgeon-turned-artist whose work explored the intersection of healing and creativity. So you're all famous," Ben said slowly, trying to process the implications of having 3 internationally recognized experts standing in his modest garage claiming they needed his help with car repairs. Which raises the obvious question of what you're really doing in Millbrook and why you've been taking surveillance photographs of my family. The anger in his voice was controlled but unmistakable, and all 3 women flinched as if he'd struck them. "We hired a private investigator," Vivian admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. 4 months ago, when we first came to Millbrook. We wanted to understand if you were authentic." The word choice struck Ben as particularly offensive, as if his life was some kind of performance that required verification. "Authentic what?" he demanded. Margaret pulled out her phone and showed him a series of professional photographs that documented his daily routine with uncomfortable intimacy. Walking Oliver to school, working late at the garage, teaching his son to throw a baseball, sitting alone on his front porch after Oliver's bedtime. "We were looking for someone who understood what real work meant," Camila explained. "Someone who created beautiful things not for fame or money, but because they believed in the value of fixing what was broken." The surveillance had been extensive and invasive, documenting not just his public behavior, but private moments that should have remained between him and Oliver. "You watched us," Ben said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "You studied us like laboratory animals, took notes on our personal habits, researched our background, and then you approached us pretending to be friendly neighbors. The violation felt complete and absolute, as if everything genuine about their interactions had been contaminated by the knowledge that it had been orchestrated from the beginning. It wasn't like that," Margaret protested, but Ben cut her off. "It was exactly like that. You treated my son and me like subjects in some kind of experiment, and then you manipulated us into trusting you." Oliver's face appeared at the kitchen window, pressed against the glass with curiosity. The sight of his son's innocent expression made Ben's anger burn hotter, fueled by protective instincts that demanded he shield Oliver from people who would use a child's natural trust for their own purposes. "Why?" The question came out raw and demanding. "Why us? Why this elaborate charade?" Vivian was the one who finally answered, her voice carrying exhaustion. "Because we were dying inside our old lives, and watching you reminded us what it felt like to be alive." The raw honesty caught Ben off guard, but he wasn't ready to let emotional appeals override his legitimate anger. "That's not an excuse for what you did," he said firmly. "Being unhappy with your own life doesn't give you the right to treat other people like entertainment." Camila stepped forward with tears beginning to form in her eyes. "You're right. What we did was wrong, and we knew it was wrong while we were doing it. But Ben, what we learned about ourselves by watching you, it changed everything for us." She gestured toward Margaret and Vivian. "We came here running away from careers that had consumed our souls, and we found you creating art every day without even realizing it. The way you teach Oliver, the care you take with your work, the love you put into maintaining Rachel's memory, that's what art is supposed to be." "My life isn't your art project," Ben said sharply, rejecting the romanticized interpretation of his daily struggle. "I'm not creating anything beautiful or meaningful. I'm just trying to survive and take care of my kid." Margaret pulled out another folder, this one containing gallery brochures and exhibition catalogues. "There's something else you need to know. We've been planning an art exhibition based on our time here, our observations of authentic American life." She handed him the materials with obvious reluctance. "The opening is next week. Everything we've learned, everything we've observed, it's all been translated into our respective art forms." Ben flipped through the brochures, seeing his garage, his tools, his hands, his son's expressions translated into bronze sculptures, musical compositions, and oil paintings that would be displayed for wealthy art collectors. The final betrayal was complete, more devastating than the surveillance because it revealed the ultimate purpose behind their elaborate charade. "You turned our lives into a fucking art show," Ben said, his voice deadly quiet. "You took private moments, personal struggles, memories of my dead wife, and you turned them into commodities for rich people to buy. The money from the exhibition is going to a foundation for single parents," Camila said desperately, as if charitable intentions could justify their actions. But Ben was beyond caring about their philanthropic motivations. "You don't get to help families like mine by exploiting us first," he said, his voice carrying finality that made all three women step backward. "Get out," Ben said simply, pointing towards the garage door. "Take your cars, take your money, take your art exhibition, and get the hell away from my family." Margaret tried to speak, reaching out as if to touch his arm, but Ben stepped back and shook his head. "No. No more explanations, no more justifications, no more manipulation. You've done enough damage." Vivian gathered their folders with hands that shook slightly, while Camila wiped tears from her cheeks. Margaret stood frozen for a moment, as if she wanted to say something that might repair the damage, but Ben's expression made it clear that nothing she could say would make any difference. "We never meant to hurt you," she said finally, her voice carrying genuine regret. "We know that doesn't excuse what we did, but we need you to understand that our feelings for you and Oliver, those were real." "Real feelings don't justify fake relationships," Ben replied, his anger giving way to exhaustion. "If you cared about us, you would have been honest from the beginning instead of treating us like research subjects." As they reached the garage door, Oliver appeared again, this time running out of the house with a piece of paper. "Wait," he called out, apparently unaware of the tension. "I drew a picture for you." He thrust the paper toward Camila with generous enthusiasm. The drawing showed 4 stick figures working together on a car, with a caption that read, "My new friends help Daddy fix cars." The innocence of the gift hit all 4 adults like a physical blow, highlighting the gap between Oliver's trusting perception and the complicated reality of deception that had been unfolding around him. Camila took the drawing with trembling hands, studying the cheerful stick figures as if they represented everything she'd lost. "Thank you, Oliver," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me." Ben placed a protective hand on Oliver's shoulder, gently steering his son away. "Say goodbye, buddy. The ladies have to go now." 3 months passed in a blur of routine and deliberate forgetfulness, with Ben throwing himself into work and fatherhood with renewed intensity, while trying to pretend that the 3 women had never disrupted their peaceful existence. Oliver asked about them frequently at first, wondering when his new friends would return, and whether they'd ever get to finish the art projects Camila had started teaching him. Ben deflected these questions as gently as possible, explaining that sometimes people had to move away for work reasons, though he suspected Oliver sensed there was more to the story. The exhibition opened as scheduled, generating reviews that Ben found himself reading despite his determination to forget about the entire experience. Critics praised the authentic portrayal of working-class American life and the innovative collaboration between three established artists. Reading descriptions of his own life translated into artistic metaphors felt surreal and violating, like discovering that strangers had been discussing his most private moments at cocktail parties. Oliver's innocent joy, Ben's grief over Rachel, their quiet evening routines had all become material for intellectual analysis by people who would never understand what those moments had actually meant. Then came the Saturday afternoon when Oliver's excited shout from the backyard announced that something terrible had happened. Ben rushed outside to find his son lying motionless beneath the oak tree, his face swollen and discolored. "I can't breathe right, Daddy," Oliver wheezed, his voice thin and strange. "My throat feels funny." The words hit Ben like lightning. Anaphylactic shock from what looked like multiple bee stings. The drive to Millbrook General Hospital passed in a blur of panicked phone calls and desperate attempts to keep Oliver conscious while navigating traffic that seemed designed to prevent emergencies. Ben carried his son into the emergency room with desperate strength, shouting for help and trying to explain the situation to medical staff who immediately recognized the severity of Oliver's condition. Within minutes, Oliver was surrounded by doctors and nurses working with efficient urgency, leaving Ben to pace the waiting room and pray to a God he'd had complicated relationships with since Rachel's death. The hours that followed were a nightmare of medical terminology and cautious optimism, with Oliver stabilized but requiring overnight observation. Ben sat beside his son's hospital bed, feeling helpless, holding Oliver's small hand and listening to the steady beep of monitoring equipment. It was during this vigil that Camila appeared in the doorway wearing medical scrubs and an expression of professional concern that immediately transformed into something more personal when she saw Ben's face. "I'm covering pediatric emergency tonight," she explained quietly, as if her presence was purely coincidental. "Dr. Martinez handled Oliver's treatment perfectly, but I wanted to check on him myself." She approached the bed with careful movements, studying Oliver's peaceful sleeping face with obvious relief. "He's going to be fine, Ben. Children are remarkably resilient, especially when they have parents who respond as quickly as you did." The conversation that followed was stilted and awkward, filled with the weight of everything that had been said and left unsaid during their previous encounter. Ben found himself studying Camila's face for signs of deception, but what he saw instead was genuine concern for Oliver's well-being and professional competence that reminded him she'd spent years saving children's lives. "Why are you here?" he asked finally. "Because this is where I belong," Camila answered simply, settling into the visitor's chair. "After everything that happened with the exhibition, we had to make some decisions about who we wanted to be. Over the course of that long night, as Oliver slept peacefully and Ben struggled with exhaustion and residual fear, Camila slowly revealed the changes that had transformed her life since their art exhibition had concluded. The show had been financially successful but personally devastating, forcing all three women to confront the reality that their pursuit of authentic artistic inspiration had led them to behave in ways that contradicted their fundamental values. "We sold our pieces," Camila explained, "and used the money to dissolve our contracts with galleries and management companies. Margaret had taken a position teaching art at Millbrook Elementary School, trading her international reputation for the opportunity to nurture creativity in children who'd never had access to professional instruction. Vivian was giving music lessons while volunteering with the local school district's struggling arts program. "We gave up everything," Camila said, though her tone suggested relief rather than regret. "The fame, the money, the recognition. Because we realized that watching you had taught us something about what really mattered, and we wanted to learn how to live that way ourselves." The revelation that they'd remained in Millbrook, quietly building new lives based on service rather than recognition, complicated Ben's feelings about their original deception in ways he wasn't prepared to process. "You stayed," he said, the words carrying surprise and something that might have been gratitude despite his determination to remain angry. "After everything that happened, you stayed." Camila nodded, careful not to interpret his observation as forgiveness. "We stayed because this is where we learned to be human again," she explained. "Not because we thought you'd eventually forgive us, but because leaving would have meant abandoning everything we'd learned about ourselves." As Oliver began to stir in his hospital bed, mumbling sleepy questions about where he was, Ben found himself facing decisions about forgiveness, second chances, and the possibility that people could fundamentally change when confronted with the consequences of their mistakes. Camila moved efficiently around Oliver's bedside, checking his vital signs and explaining his condition in terms an 8-year-old could understand, her medical expertise providing exactly the kind of comfort and reassurance that Ben had been unable to offer during his emotional exhaustion. "Dr. Santos helped take care of you," Ben explained when Oliver asked about the nice lady in scrubs. "She works here at the hospital now." Oliver's face brightened with recognition and delight. "Are you going to stay this time?" he asked Camila, with the direct honesty that children use when they want real answers. Camila looked at Ben before answering, clearly understanding that her response needed to respect whatever boundaries he chose to establish. "I work here now," she said carefully, "so you might see me sometimes if you need medical care. But that would be up to your daddy." The decision to seek out Margaret and Vivian came from Oliver's persistent questions about what had happened to his art teacher friend and the nice lady who taught him about engine sounds. Ben found Margaret at Millbrook Elementary during her lunch break, sitting in an empty classroom surrounded by student artwork that covered every wall with cheerful chaos. She looked up from grading papers with surprise and hope when Ben appeared carrying Camilla's forgotten sketchbook. "She left this in my garage," Ben explained simply, though both understood that his presence represented something more significant than returning a lost item. Margaret accepted the sketchbook with trembling hands, flipping through pages filled with sketches of Oliver laughing, Ben working, quiet family moments captured with loving attention. "These aren't surveillance drawings," Ben observed, noting the difference between the clinical documentation he'd seen and the affectionate portraits that filled Camilla's personal art. "No," Margaret agreed quietly. "These are love letters. To the life she discovered here, to the family that taught her what authentic connection looked like." Her classroom was warm and inviting, filled with evidence of genuine care for children who might never have access to art education without her presence. Student paintings depicted families, pets, favorite activities, all rendered with fearless creativity that adults typically lost somewhere along the path to professional sophistication. The conversation that followed was difficult and necessary, filled with acknowledgments of harm done and tentative explorations of whether repair might be possible given sufficient time and changed behavior. Margaret explained the financial and professional sacrifices all three women had made to extract themselves from careers that had become spiritually corrosive, trading recognition and wealth for the opportunity to contribute something meaningful to a community that had unknowingly taught them valuable lessons. "We lost everything," she said, though her tone suggested relief rather than regret. and discovered that everything we'd lost was worthless compared to what we'd found. Ben studied the classroom around them, noting the obvious care Margaret had invested in creating an environment where children could explore creativity without judgment. The healing that began in Margaret's classroom continued through a series of careful, boundaried interactions that gradually rebuilt trust through consistent actions rather than convincing words. Oliver's delight at discovering that his favorite art teacher was also the nice lady who'd helped his father with cars created natural opportunities for supervised contact that allowed Ben to observe whether the changes in Margaret's behavior were genuine. What he saw was someone who'd fundamentally altered her relationship with her work and community, choosing service over recognition and authentic connection over strategic networking. Vivian's transformation was equally evident when Ben found her teaching violin lessons in her modest apartment, working with children whose families couldn't afford traditional music education, but whose enthusiasm deserved professional guidance. Her living space was sparse but comfortable, furnished with items chosen for function rather than status, a stark contrast to the luxury lifestyle her previous career had afforded. "I sleep better now," she told Ben during one of their awkward but necessary conversations, "knowing that what I do matters to people who really need it, rather than people who can afford it." The three women had created new lives that honored the lessons they'd learned through their misguided surveillance of Ben's family, choosing careers and lifestyles that prioritized contribution over recognition and authentic relationships over strategic networking. They maintained respectful distance from Ben and Oliver while remaining available for the kinds of professional interactions that naturally occurred in a small community. Margaret as Oliver's art teacher, Camila as their pediatrician, Vivian as a music instructor who occasionally provided entertainment at school events. 6 months after Oliver's hospital stay, as Ben stood in his garage working on a neighbor's transmission while Oliver sorted bolts and asked endless questions about automotive systems, he realized that their lives had found a new equilibrium that incorporated the positive changes the three women had brought while maintaining necessary boundaries. The restored Chevelle sat in its place of honor, finally running after years of careful restoration work that Ben had completed with help from friends and neighbors who'd learned to appreciate the therapeutic value of working with their hands on problems that had clear solutions. Margaret, Vivian, and Camila remained peripheral figures in their daily lives, present enough to contribute to their community, but distant enough to respect the boundaries that Ben had established for his family's protection. They'd created what felt like the best possible outcome from a situation that had begun with serious violations of trust, genuine service to others, professional fulfillment through meaningful work, and gradual healing of relationships that had been damaged but not entirely destroyed by their original deception. As evening settled over Millbrook and Ben helped Oliver with homework at their kitchen table while dinner cooked on the stove, he found himself thinking about second chances and the complex process of rebuilding trust through consistent actions over time. The three women who'd invaded their privacy and turned their lives into art had also taught them valuable lessons about community, creativity, and the possibility that broken things could be repaired when people committed to doing the necessary work with patience and genuine care. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight his family was safe, fed, and surrounded by evidence that their quiet life contained more beauty and meaning than any art exhibition could ever capture or display,